Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about how to stop the Tempestus Aquilons from kicking down your back door and brutalizing you. So, it's finally here. We're finally going to discuss what are the effective ways and means of dealing with this, quite frankly, broken unit. Now, I don't want to upset any guard players, and I just want to kind of get this out in the, you know, out in the open right away as soon as we start the video. I am a guard enjoyer myself. I like the Imperial Guard. They were the first army I've ever played in 40k. I continue to have a soft spot for them as an army. I don't currently play them, but I have played them a lot in the past, and I have found them fun and enjoyable and so forth. However, I also recognize that there have been periods of time where the Guard have been a little bit busted. And especially against the squishier factions, I think they have a lot of strengths that, quite frankly, are sometimes too much to deal with. And when the release of the Tempestus Aquilons came out, just, with the latest kill team, it was a little bit of a shock to me that GW would give such a powerful rule to an army that is already pretty good at dealing with the types of enemies that Aquilons are good at. Actually killing and dealing with. The other thing is that on a whole, I believe that every army should have strengths and weaknesses, and that not every army needs every tool for every situation. It's how the player plays around those deficits that make the game interesting. And when you start just throwing in units and saying, oh, okay, what doesn't this army have yet? Let's give them that so that, now they have that weakness covered or this weakness covered. I think that's a little bit degenerate, to be honest. And I think that it's not something sustainable in the game in general. So anyway, at least as far as the flavor of the game goes. But GW has obviously chosen a different path in competitive play. They want to give everybody basically, tons of options, stuff like that, which is fine. But I just think that this particular unit may be a little bit too much. Now, having gotten that out of the way, and just we're gonna kind of seal the deal on that one. How do you actually deal with them? Well, thankfully, the Aquilons have a couple of weaknesses that we can exploit as the Eldar. And not every faction can exploit this well. I feel sorry for those other factions, but luckily we do have some units in our own army that can effectively deal with them if you know how to position correctly and if you know how to, kind of utilize them to their strengths. So, what we're going to be doing first is taking a look at the Aquilons datasheet, doing a quick review of that. We're going to talk about what the Aquilons are good at and what they're weak against. And we're going to be talking about the Aeldari counters to Aquilons and how to position our units for success. So first off, let's look at the datasheet itself. Now, on the outset, they look like your standard Aquilons. They have the basic stat line. They're pretty squishy. The only probably more durable thing about these guys is that they have a 4+ save versus a 5+, which is the regular guardsman save. Their abilities, though, are really where they start to shine because they have the precision drop ability. They can drop 3 inches away from any unit, any enemy unit. They can't declare a charge when they do so, but they usually don't need to. They're not great in combat anyway. They also have the ability called the Servo Sentry. So basically when you deploy using Deep Strike, you can shoot with the Sentry weapon immediately as if it were your shooting phase. So this is one of those things where I kind of scratch my head at because this unit essentially has 2 abilities, right? Not just 1 ability, but 2. Okay, having said that, let's look at their ranged weapons and stuff like that. They're not great in melee. Like I said, you can give the Sergeant a power weapon, but that's usually not that great. If we look at what else they have the Sentry weapon, which can either be armed with a Flamer, which is a D6 +3 Flamer. It's a little bit better than your average Flamer there. They have the Sentry Grenade Launcher, which can launch frag or crack grenades. And the crack grenades are decent against marine equivalents and stuff like that. They can maybe ding a light vehicle or two. And the frag is good against light infantry with blast, but it's probably not as good as the flamer. The Melta Carbine, or excuse me, first let's talk about the Sentry Hotshot Volley Gun. That's going to be 8 shots within 15 inches, which they're always going to be in, so, rapid fire 4 there. They're going to be hitting on a 4+ though with that weapon, and it's just going to be basically a bolt rifle, strength 4, AP -1. Not a huge deal there. They also get the choice of a Melta Carbine or Plasma Carbine in the unit. The Plasma Carbine is an 18-inch, 2-attack plasma gun. That's it. It has assault. The Melta Carbine is an assault weapon. It has Melta 2, and it's 10 inches, which means it's only going to be able to fire, get that Melta bonus within 5 inches, but, of course, these guys have 3-inch deep strike, so that's not usually an issue for them. They can also take the Hotshot Long Last, which is a sniper weapon. Don't know why a deep striking specialist unit would be carrying a sniper weapon into battle with them, but there you go. They have it. It's probably a kill team inclusion because snipers are really good in kill team. Has heavy, has precision, although they still hit on a 3+ with it. 36-inch range, strength 4, AP -2, damage 3. This thing is very good at taking out like characters, things like Spirit Seers, maybe even possibly, not always, but possibly a Solitaire if it misses its invul save, and stuff like that. Basically anything with 3 wounds, this thing is pretty good against. Alright, so that's the layout of the unit. Now, the weaknesses of the unit are that they can only really take a couple of weapons, right? They can only take 1 Hotshot Long Last. They can't take multiple. They can only take 1 Melta gun or plasma gun. So they can't take 2 of each like the normal Tempestus Scions can. A couple of their models can also be equipped with double pistol, but again, this is just a worse version of the last carbines, so I really don't see that as much of an issue. This is, the pistols are mostly there probably for kill team. Pistols are pretty good in kill team for the most part, but you're going to be seeing these guys equipped with the last carbines most of the time in games. Now, the Aquilon, the Tempester, I should say, the sergeant of the unit, is equipped with the sentry gun. So this is not really a model. I would think of it kind of like the Brightlance platform, except it doesn't actually physically take up space on the board. And I think the weirdest part about these guys is that they're only 90 points, and as far as their keywords go, they basically have everything you need. They have infantry, they have grenades, which is standard, right? But they also have smoke, which is interesting. Why they would have the smoke keyword as an infantry unit. I don't think Tempestus Scions have the smoke keyword, but correct me if I'm wrong. It just seems like they gave them the smoke keyword because maybe of kill team, because you can take a smoke grenade in kill team. But this just seems extra. This seems like something that's just really good for no real reason to include in a game of 40k. But anyway, they have the smoke keyword, which makes them reasonably durable against counterattacking if they choose to use that stratagem. And I will talk about, that more when we talk about what they're good at. So, what are Aquilons effective at and what are they weak at? So, they are effective at killing single wound infantry, light vehicles, and lone operatives or squishy characters because they can take that long last. It has precision. They're hitting on a 3+. Against Eldar characters, they're wounding on a 3+. So, it's not unreasonable that they're going to force a 4+ invul save on you. And if you fail it, your Spirit Seer's dead, your Solitaire's dead. A lot of our characters do have 4 wounds, so a lot of them will be safe, but that's a big deal. If one of these guys, one single model, can take out a Spirit Seer, right? That sucks. The Melta Carbine can easily trade up into light vehicles, things like war walkers. If you miss your invul there, you're in danger. They can also trade into things like Vipers and D cannons. They're also, of course, really good at killing single wound infantry. They have a flamer that automatically hits you when it deep strikes down, and it can also shoot normally in the shooting phase. So if you thought your aspect warrior unit could survive, like your swooping hawks, think again. These guys will burn those swooping hawks and also probably kill something else in your army if they have line of sight to it. They're also really good at scoring secondary objectives and move blocking. Now you might be thinking, move blocking, Proxy Hammer, this is not a move blocking unit. But actually, this unit's really good at it because it's a 10 model unit and they can deep strike 3 inches. So they can basically spread out across the battlefield a very long distance and block off huge lanes of movement for enemy units. Not so great against the Eldar because we have a lot of flying stuff and typically we just don't care. But this could absolutely destroy your plans with the melee-based unit. Like if you want to get Kahandras and the boys, Scorpions, into combat with maybe some Bulgrins or something like that, I don't know why you'd be charging into them, but you can probably still be doing some significant damage into that kind of unit. Maybe you just have to take that objective, right? Tempestus Aquilons can just deep strike right there, or even just rapid ingress. And rapid ingress right in front, 3 inches away from your Scorpions to make sure that you can't charge that unit. So they're really good at move blocking. And this is one of those things, right, where that 3-inch deep strike rule is really, really good because you don't have to spend any resources for it. So it's not like other armies which may have a stratagem that allows them to 3-inch deep strike, so that you can't really combine it effectively with rapid ingress because it's a lot of CP and the phasing isn't going to quite work out using that strategy, And if you talk about other armies like Inceptors, for example, Inceptors can do the same thing, but they're much more expensive. They don't move block as well because, they don't take as much space up as the Tempestuses. And, of course, as we all know, Space Marines are very durable, but there's not a lot of models on the table. So they do have their weaknesses, and Inceptors are one of those units that don't trade specifically well against the Eldar and other factions like Eldar. So, what are they weak at, though? Because they must have weaknesses, right? Well, one of the biggest weaknesses they have is they don't deal damage well to durable units. So, one Melt-A-Gun, a bunch of Strength 3, it's not going to do anything to your durable units. Your Wraithguard, your Avatar of Cain, I would even argue that your Vrain Brick, it's just, they're not going to do much to it, especially if you layer a buff or a stratagem on them to protect them. Also, they're weak at dealing with heavy Overwatch, things with Flamers. Thousand Suns wouldn't have much of a problem against these guys because everything's armed with a Warp Flamer, right? Units that have flame type weapons, torrent weapons, or just really good Overwatch are going to be able to deal with these guys no problem because they just die in droves to any kind of fire coming their way. So, let's talk about the effective Aeldari counters to Aquilons because we actually have some pretty effective means of countering them in our lists, some of which you might not be thinking of and some of which you'll probably already be considering. So, boom. First unit we're going to talk about, Dire Avengers. Why are Dire Avengers a good counter to these guys? Well, because of defensive tactics and because they are a reasonably cheap unit and one that I think is kind of underrated. Now, I've talked about the Dire Avengers before. I've compared them to Swooping Hawks. Swooping Hawks have gotten more expensive over the edition. I used to say that for 5 more points, you can pick up a unit of Swooping Hawks and it can be just as good as Dire Avengers in most situations or better. That's not the case anymore. They are now 85 points a unit, and Dire Avengers comparatively look better. Other units in other armies have also gotten more expensive, so, Dire Avengers have a little bit more play than they used to, maybe, because of their ability defensive tactics. So, we look at this, they normally Overwatch on a 5+, but if they're on an objective that you control, they do it on a 4+. This is extremely good. Now, a lot of people are going to think that the Dire Avengers are going to be able to control the midboard. In the beginning of the edition, I used Dire Avengers to do this in a Mekdar style list. I used Zerman. I would stack Overwatch on, Overwatch on Overwatch, because you could kind of do that back then. Overwatch was much more powerful in the beginning of the edition. Now that's not really, it's just not as possible as it once was. There's ways around Overwatch that, you have to deal with and stuff. So throwing them on a middle objective might not be exactly the best thing to do with them. But here's the thing. A unit of these guys can sit on your home objective. And I know a lot of people will be like, oh, that's a waste of their potential. But the first couple turns, they can sit on your home objective for 140 points. And they have 18-inch range, so they have an 18-inch overwatch. And they can basically cover your entire backline. If anything tries to deep strike and your backline tries to kill your support weapons, tries to kill your war walkers, tries to kill any unit that you have around that area, your lone op, your autarch wayleaper, I could go on. The Dire Avengers are there to overwatch you and kill you. Yes, you might have Guardian Defenders back there as well, but you could also have, literally one Dire Avenger on the objective, and you can get a 4+ Overwatch. Now, their weapons don't look amazing, but they're basically just bolters. They're just lethal hit, 3 attack, bolt rifles, right? Which is really good against Scions. It might not be good against Marines, but it's good against the Scions. So, let's do some math real quick. Right? When on an objective, Dire Avengers will kill about 7 Aquilons on average Overwatch. And 12 when under the effects of Guide, which allow them to reroll hits. So if you guys don't know, the Farseer Skyrunner has this ability called Guide. You can cast it on them, and then, obviously, they get to reroll all their hits for 1 round. That includes on things like Overwatch. Now, 7 Aquilons, it doesn't seem great, but what it is going to do is it's going to take that unit out of the game, and they're not going to be able to function as effectively with just 3 models left. If they're under the effects of Guide, however, they kill 12 of them. And that basically eliminates a target altogether. That just depends what else your list has. If it has a Farseer Skyrunner in it already, if it has a unit of Wind Riders in it already, then this is a good play. But if you don't have it, it's still pretty good because you can kill 7 Aquilons on average Overwatch. The Dire Avengers are also useful later in the game. So, turns 2, turns 3, your opponent deep strikes down, tries to kill your autarch wayleaper, which is a good play. I guarantee you being able to kill 7 of those guys makes it impossible. Well, pretty much impossible to actually kill the Wayleaper effectively. So, boom, there you go. However, let's add a Zerman to the mix. A Zerman actually does something interesting because if you put him with a unit of 5, you kill about 6 on average Overwatch, and 9 when under the effects of Guide. And that's just when you have 5 of them. So it is a more expensive build to put a Zerman in there, but a Zerman's also really good. And then later on in the game, you can use a Zerman to charge objectives in the midfield and stuff like that and just sweep units off of them because he's really good in combat. So there's a couple of different things you can do with Dire Avengers to make them really effective, counters against Tempestus Aquilons. Let's talk about Wind Riders a little bit as well. So Wind Riders are another really effective counter against Aquilons. I love Wind Riders. They're the best Marine equivalent killers in our index, in my honest and humble opinion. They have shuriken cannons, each one of them. They're pretty cheap at 80 points for 3. And they have the Swift Demise ability. Each time they make a range attack that targets a closest eligible target, you reroll a hit roll of 1. If that target is also in range of an objective your opponent controls, you can reroll the hit roll instead. So usually what this means is if something deep strikes near you and you overwatch it, you're going to reroll hit rolls of 1. If they happen to, for whatever reason, deep strike on an objective and start controlling that objective, then you're going to reroll all the hit rolls. Actually, kind of funny that this actually kind of works against Aquilons, because Aquilons, if you only have a single model on an objective, for example, Aquilons can actually control the objective by deep striking within 3 inches, right? Or just outside of 3 inches. So the Wind Rider's full reroll ability might actually come into play against that unit if you're defending an objective. So, maybe it's later in the game, turn 3, the Aquilons have to come on the board. You set up your Wind Riders so that you can see the objective, but your opponent can't really, see you. And then you have an Avatar of Cain maybe on the middle objective or something like that. And your opponent says, well, I'm just going to out OC your Avatar of Cain. I'm not even going to fight it, right? Puts 6 or 7 Aquilons on the objective, kind of spreads him out, makes sure that he has objective control. Well, you overwatch with Wind Riders, and now the Aquilon unit is going to be destroyed because you're getting rerolls of all hits. You can also, of course, guide the Wind Riders, and that just gives them rerolls regardless of whether they're on an objective or not. So this unit actually ends up being insane at being able to overwatch these kind of lighter targets. And of course, I didn't mention this, but the Shuriken Cannon has sustained hits 1. So every hit is actually going to be 2 hits. So let's do some math. A max unit of Wind Riders with guide and a Farseer Skyrunner and Warlock Skyrunner kills 13 on average Overwatch. That's a ton of death. A max unit of 9 Wind Riders with their ability and a Farseer plus a Warlock Skyrunner kills 8 on average Overwatch. That is without guide, and that is assuming they're only rerolling ones to hit. So you're still killing a vast majority of the unit. They're no longer going to be able to control that objective. They're no longer going to be effective in your backline. And, they may be able to score on a secondary or something like that, but that's about it. So Wind Riders, another really effective way of dealing with these guys. However, we have another unit that a lot of you guys already run in your lists that is also just as effective. And that is, of course, Warp Spiders. So, Warp Spiders are a common pick for a lot of Aeldari players. They're very competitive. We're seeing people kind of go away from Warp Spiders a little bit because, they are expensive, they are fragile, but they do have Torrent devastating wound weapons. So, they're doing a lot of damage on Overwatch. Now, they are limited by the range 12, but if you position them correctly to protect your more vulnerable units, it's usually not an issue. And because of the way terrain's set up, if you place them just right, the Aquilons are not going to be able to deploy in a way that, well, in normal circumstances, in a way that will get outside of 12, but still remain within range of their own weapons or within line of sight. Because remember, there's so much line of sight blocking terrain on boards now. So, basic math here, 5 Warp Spiders kill about 9 Aquilons on Overwatch. No joke. And that's not accounting for models that may die from the Sentry weapon, but even if 1 Warp Spider dies from the Flamer, which probably won't even happen because the Flamer is doing about 1 wound if you're able to, kind of buff the Warp Spider squad to make them a little more durable. And I'll talk about that in a second. But you're killing 9 of them, which is pretty insane. So they only have 1 left. It's probably going to be the, Tempester, the squad leader. And, maybe they fire a Flamer again, but that's not going to really do much, right? It's not going to do enough. So Warp Spiders are another very effective means of Overwatch and being able to protect your backline. They're actually the cheapest way of doing it at just 125 points versus a unit of Dire Avengers of 10, which is going to be 140, and a big unit of Wind Riders, which is going to be a lot more points. Okay, so let's talk about some tips for protecting your vulnerable units from Aquilons. First of all, throw Fortune on them. Now, I know that seems really bizarre and wacko. Why would I throw Fortune on, a unit of like a unit of Warp Spiders, for example, or my Autarch Wayleaver, or my Solitaire, when I could throw it on an Avatar of Cain, right? Well, while normally it is used on more durable units, if your opponent is playing Imperial Guard, and maybe your Avatar of Cain doesn't want to just march up to the midboard right away and just get blasted by Rogel Dorns and Leman Russ, tank commanders and stuff. Maybe you hold your Avatar of Khaine back a little bit. The Avatar of Khaine isn't really threatened by a lot of their indirect fire, but you know what is threatened by that kind of stuff and Aquilons? It are your more vulnerable units, right? So you can throw this on a unit of Swooping Hawks. You can throw this on a unit of Warp Spiders, or Dire Avengers, or Guardians, right? And your opponent's going to have a lot harder time dealing with them. That Flamer that comes down and does D6 plus 3 is all of a sudden having to wound your guys on 4+. All of their weapons are wounding you on 5+, their last carbines. Right? So that's going to increase the durability of your unit by a lot. So yeah, throwing Fortune on a unit, again, makes them more durable, throws your opponent off, especially with a combination of Overwatch. Also consider saving some CP for lightning fast reactions. It won't really help against the Torrent Weapon Flamer, but other weapons hitting on 4+ does help. That infamous Melt-A-Gun hitting on a 4, that helps. And, it's not always going to be relevant, but it sometimes is. Also, keeping light vehicles like Warwalkers, like Vipers, within range of a Farseer, so you can use a Fate die to make a save, is really useful against the Melt-A-Carbine. Chances are you're going to be in cover. You're going to get a 6-up save. Your Falcons and stuff like that. Your Warwalkers will get a 4-up, but, even your Viper will get a 6-up save. Using a Farseer to flip a Fate dice to a 6 can save that Viper's life. Really good thing to keep in mind. Also, keeping units that can't really benefit from all of the above within Overwatch range of your Warp Spiders, Wind Riders, and Dire Avengers is crucial. So, what doesn't benefit from the above, you might ask? Well, things that are going to be either overwhelmed anyway, like, case in point, right? Things like the Solitaire, or support weapons. Support weapons don't get a save, right? They do not get a save against a Melt-A-Carbine because they have a 4+ save base. With cover, they have a 3-up. Melt-A-Carbine has AP -4. That support weapon is going to die. So, what's a good way to protect it? Overwatch, right? And unfortunately, you might still not be able to protect it. That's really the main issue here. Unless you kill the entire unit and get a good roll, it's just not going to happen. So there are a couple ways to ensure that it does happen right, and I told you guys about that. Dire Avengers with Guide will ensure that support weapons will survive this. So if you're a player who really likes to use support weapons, consider picking up a unit of Dire Avengers for this role, right? Especially if you go against Guard a lot. Keeping them in the backfield near your support weapons will ensure that they do a pretty good job at, destroying whatever comes in the backfield. Okay, so that's really it. That's really all you can do against Aquilons, unfortunately. They're a really strong unit, but I think that, luckily as Eldar, we have a couple of ways to mitigate some of their, Alpha Strike potential. Again, Overwatch is going to be your best friend, though, and that's probably going to be the best tool to use against them. So, in conclusion, they're definitely a hard counter to a lot of the expensive vulnerable aspect warriors that we bring to battle. However, Aquilons are also very squishy themselves, and they are pretty vulnerable to Overwatch. And luckily our faction has a lot of units that can Overwatch well. Good placement is also key, and remember that even though Aquilons have a 3-inch deep strike, they don't ignore line of sight. So the best way to avoid the Aquilons' damage is to place your vulnerable units behind ruin walls. Place them just, a little bit 1 inch back so they can't also get assaulted by something. And then, they're still behind line of sight. And then put your Overwatch unit, like your Wind Riders or your Warp Spiders, behind the ruin footprint to ensure your opponent has a tough time avoiding Overwatch. So your opponent really has a choice here. Either they deep strike down and get Overwatched if they try to target your vulnerable unit, or they just can't go after you, right? So essentially, you guys will notice that on most Leviathan boards, you know, they usually have a piece of terrain with ruin walls, and it's like an L-shaped ruin, right? So it's very simple. You put your models behind that L-shaped ruin, your vulnerable unit, your D cannon, your Viper or whatever it is. That will be well hidden there anyway. And then you put your Overwatch unit behind. If your opponent wants to get in back of the ruin to be able to shoot at your Viper, shoot at your Solitaire or whatever it is, they're going to have to endure an Overwatch. So your opponent might not be able to or want to do that, right? So that's a good thing to remember. Okay, that's what I got for today. It's, one of those things where they're a really strong unit for the cost right now, and they're probably going to get hit in the next balance data slate. But in the meantime, they're going to be really strong. Guard are, of course, doing really well. And I have to say, their Aquilons are doing really well in competitive play, but they're also just destroying local, casual and semi-competitive play too. They're just ripping things apart. So, I hope they do get nerfed. I'm sorry. I know that they're a new unit and everything like that, but I think GW kind of underpriced them for what they can do, and I think that should be adjusted accordingly. But I do think they're a cool unit, and I do think obviously they should be good, and they will be good, just at a higher points cost. And people will still bring them. You'll still see guard running probably one unit of them because they are really good. It's just they're criminally undercosted at the moment. So anyway, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. I want to thank all my patrons and supporters who have, of course, continued to support me and the channel. You've helped the channel grow considerably, and we're well over 5K subscribers now. And if you want to join our channel's Discord, talk about Eldar, chat with me about strategies or tactics or painting or anything like that, come join us. It's totally free to join. You just have to sign up for a Patreon free trial, which you can, of course, cancel before the 7 days are up, and you will get permanent access to our Discord community, which is an awesome community. So please think about joining. Also, I'm an Amazon affiliate, so if you want to go ahead and use my Amazon affiliate link to buy some discounted Eldar minis, you can do so. And lastly, I do have a channel store page, which sells Eldar-inspired apparel. You can go ahead and check that out as well if you want to grab some shirts or sweaters or whatever to rep your favorite faction at your local game store. And that's going to be it for today, guys. Peace out, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.